Fantastic. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lara Villamat, she and hers. I am the head of Outreach and Community Experience here at the Framingham Public Library. And joining me tonight is my partner in crime, the director of the Ashland Public Library, Mina Jane. We are so thrilled to have you join us here tonight with Sarah Penner as a part of our TBR series. This is the final event in the series, so we are thrilled that you are all here tonight joining us. Huge thanks to the Friends of the Framingham and the Ashland Public Libraries who make events like this possible. As the lovely lady told you when you signed in tonight, the event is being recorded, so if you have anybody who you know would love to hear from Sarah, please check out the Ashland Public Library YouTube channel. The recording will be posted up there. And also we will be taking notes throughout the evening on Sarah's recommendations. So you don't have to worry about trying to write everything down. We will do that for you. And then we will send a follow-up email to your email with the list of recommendations. And with that, we would like to welcome Sarah. We were talking just offline. If you are a Framingham patron, you might have had the chance to read Sarah's book, The Lost Apothecary, in our book club. And if you haven't, you should definitely check it out. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Lara, and thank you, Mina. I'm so thrilled to be here. And I was saying earlier that this is such a fun, different event for me because this is about what I'm reading and what I've loved reading. And as authors, we don't get to spend enough time on that question, I think. So I'm so honored to be here and thrilled to chat with everybody.
And for those of you who aren't familiar, TBR is to be read. So we are asking Sarah what is on her to be read pile and potentially what she has just finished reading. And just to completely launch us straight in, Sarah, why do you think that people have TBR piles?
Why do I think that people have TBR piles? We all have so much that we love about diving into stories, whether they're fiction, whether it's nonfiction. I actually have a little bit of both. I'm going to show you tonight. But the reality is there's just not enough time to read as much as we want. I mean, I think if all of us were asked, what are your top 3 hobbies? I'm sure every single one of us on this call would say reading is one of them. But we have jobs, we have lives, we have kids, we have dogs. So we have to have those TBR piles, those stacks of books, whether actually we can hold them or whether they're ebooks or audiobooks, but we can't get to them all. So we've got to have a waiting queue.
So the big question, the question of the hour, what is on your TBR pile?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of books here that I have already read, and so I'm going to talk about those when we get to that question, but I chose 2 that are on my TBR pile right now. And I'm going to tell you kind of how they were recommended to me and basically what they're about, but keep in mind I haven't read them, so this is basically just what I know of the book. The first one is A Reliable Wife by Robert Goulrick. This was recommended to me by an author who's also a mentor and a very dear friend named Heather Webb. Some of you may have heard of her. Last Christmas in Paris is probably her most well-known title. But she knows that I like scandalous mysteries. So for anybody who's read The Lost Apothecary, and then those of you who are maybe interested in pre-ordering my next book, you will soon learn I love scandalous mysteries. And A Reliable Wife is about a gentleman, I don't know what year it is, but I think it might be somewhat historical. He puts out an advertisement for a reliable wife in the newspaper. A woman responds that she's a simple, honest woman. And of course, she was anything but honest. And it sounds like some sort of really juicy mystery, perhaps crime unfolds. So this has been sitting in my living room on a table for a couple of months now, and I'm just waiting for the right time. I feel like the weather's cooling down, so I think it's getting to that point where I'm kind of ready for this good, juicy mystery. The other book, this was a Reese's book club, so I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this. The other book on my TBR is The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, I think is how you say that. This is about Agatha Christie and her unexplained disappearance. My mother, who's a very avid reader, she read this and basically devoured it. And as soon as she was done, she handed it over to me and said, Sarah, you absolutely have to read this. This has to go to the top of your to be read list. But of course, it's like this one sitting on my table in my living room because there's just not enough time. So it's also kind of funny. I just opened up to see a bookmark, and there's little dachshunds. I guess that's what I chose as my bookmark for this book. And it's from a friend. I don't even remember getting this, but I have a dachshund who's actually here sitting next to me. So that would be why someone gave me a card with dachshunds on it. So those are my two TBRs that I'm most excited about, that when I can, hopefully here in the next few weeks, I'll dive into these.
And you've answered my next question already. What are you looking forward to reading? Is there anything else that pops into your head that's maybe not yet on your TBR, but it is, on your mind?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm reading now. I can't remember if that was one of the questions, but I don't actually think it is, strangely. So I'll just tell you what I'm reading.
That's a good one.
Because I'm only halfway through it. So half of it is still to be read. This is a book that comes out March 14th, 2023 in the States. I think it comes out a little bit sooner in the UK. This author is based in the UK. It's called The Secrets of Heartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden. She is a huge fanatic of the Victorian era and Victorian literature. And she has a blog and a YouTube channel and all these things. And so she wrote this book, and it is a quintessential manor house Gothic mystery. So for those of you who love Rebecca, which I love, and those of you who are fans of Jane Eyre, the Brontes, this is right up your alleyway. It's available for pre-order, I think, everywhere. Or of course, if your local library has it available to request ahead of time, that would be preferable. But this is described as a Gothic mystery and a love letter to Victorian fiction. It takes place in 1852, and it's about a young widow who takes on the role of a governess at a very spooky mansion in England, and very quickly starts to suspect that something awry is going on with the house and its inhabitants. I am 120 pages in. And this is like the type of book that I want to sit down on the couch by myself with a candle and the lights down low and maybe like a glass of red wine. It just sort of has that feel about it. I wouldn't take that. This isn't a beach read, for instance, but it's very interesting. The prose is beautiful. She's a wonderful writer. So this is what I'm reading now, and I'm so excited to figure out what is going on with this house. I'm tempted to flip to like the last few chapters, but I'm not. I'm gonna savor it slowly. And there's also a forbidden romance, which I love. If it's not clear yet, I love scandal. So that's another thing that's kind of fun to watch unfold.
Now, this is not our list, but as you're listing all of these books, I feel like all of them are crying out for a beverage. Is red wine always your go-to, or is there a different beverage of choice?
I don't discriminate. I love tea. I love coffee. I love red wine. I love white wine. I love cocktails. I love water. I'll drink anything. But yeah, for some reason, red wine just strikes me as the right beverage for that particular book.
Well, and I just feel like all of these, they're crying out for a beverage as you described them. So I wondered what yours was.
Yeah.
How about books that were on your TBR that you've just finished that you've loved?
Yes. Let me see on my pile. I don't want to, it's very precarious and I don't want it to fall. Here's a book that I loved. I read this over the summer because my husband and I went to Italy for 2 weeks. And in the spirit of that, I read The Enchanted April, The Enchanted April. The author is Elizabeth von Arnim. This is a classic. This is a bit of a beach read or kind of a travel read. If you're planning a trip to Italy, by all means, give this a whirl. This book is about 4 women, very different, who end up leaving the dreary city of London and going to a villa in Italy on the coastline and learning a lot about themselves and each other. And, as authors especially, we really focus on character arcs throughout the course of our story. And you'll notice as readers that the characters, what they embody at the beginning of the story is often not what they embody at the end of the story. They've learned some sort of lesson and it's changed them. And that's what we see happen to these 4 women who, at the very beginning of the story, they don't really like each other and they kind of pick at each other's nerves. And then ultimately we see this really beautiful growth for all of them. This is one of those feel-good reads that just kind of, you want to read on like a terrace. And Laura, to your point, maybe with like an Aperol spritz or a Prosecco. I think I'm just going to do this now. I'm just going to give a drink for all of the books that I
love it. I love it. Our patrons didn't even know what they signed up for.
That's right. That's right. So yes, I would pair this with a Prosecco or an Aperol spritz. And this book it made me laugh out loud so many times. But not in a super hilarious way, but more so in like a subtle way. Just the way that these 4 women interacted, I felt like I was a fly on the wall watching as 4 semi-disgruntled women tried to live together for a period of time. So you're bound to have a few laughs out of that. So this is a feel-good read that I really loved. And it's a classic. I often, after I read books, I give them away, but this one will stay on my bookshelf. I can see myself rereading this one a few times.
You touched on this a little bit on your website, but is there a particular book or author that inspired you to become a writer?
Yes, I have 4 things that I can respond to that with, and I have 2 of those actual books with me now. I would say the first author who inspired me to become a writer was Philippa Gregory. She writes a lot about the monarchy and the Tudors, and I always just found her stories to be such a beautiful glimpse into what that life would be like. And for those of us who consider ourselves Anglophiles, we love castles and manor houses and the Tower of London. I mean, those are the places that her stories take place, but she makes the stories feel very accessible and real. It's not like reading a Wikipedia page about Henry VIII. Instead, we're actually seeing the things that happened to the people in his circle from their viewpoints. So it doesn't feel academic. It feels very real and accessible. So Philippa Gregory for one. Then I discovered in my early 20s, I discovered Ken Follett. I'm sure everybody here has heard of him. This is his brick of a book, World Without End. Pillars of the Earth is another one that I read. These take a while to get through. I mean, this is a huge book. But he is, for anybody who likes historical fiction, if you haven't read Ken Follett, you've got to check him out. It's funny, he actually has an entire literary agency just dedicated to him. So yeah, definitely love Ken Follett. I found him very inspiring. Although our writing styles are nothing alike, I just kind of appreciate, the research that goes into his work. The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. I don't have that one here with me. That book I devoured and found that very inspiring, especially because that has a little bit of magical realism in it. And my stories are historical mysteries with elements of magical realism. So I think she does that really well. It also, the Historian begins with a woman going into a library and kind of finding a secret in what I believe was her grandfather's book or diary. And that's such a compelling beginning for me. I mean, if I have a character who's going into a dusty library and pulling out a dusty book and finding a secret that then sets her on this quest, that's exactly the type of story I love. So The Historian was right down my alley. And then I'll save the best for last because this woman is one of my very dear friends, Fiona Davis. This was her debut, The Dollhouse. She's written now a ton more. But this was the first book of hers that I read, and I kind of discovered this dual timeline commercial historical fiction, which is what The Lost Apothecary was. And what I mean by commercial is the prose isn't super dense. It's not super heavy and difficult to read. You don't need to take a deep breath before you open up the book. It feels very accessible and easy to read, but that's actually very difficult to write books that readers can kind of fly through and have good pacing and good structure. So Fiona is just a gem. We actually share an agent. And we have a call about once a month to kind of catch up. So if no one has read any of Fiona Davis's work, all of her stories are set in New York, and they are all dual timelines. So typically we have in the later era, we have a female character kind of solving a mystery or a crime that occurred in the prior era. So she does dual timelines very well.
What are some books or authors that inspire you now that you are a writer, and with a couple books on their way or already out?
Yeah. Two authors that I really admire and look up to. One of them is Kristen Harmel. She is very well known in the historical fiction space. This is her book, the Book of Lost Names. She does a lot of World War II, although just yesterday, I believe it was her debut, The Sweetness of Forgetting, her publisher re-released a 10th anniversary edition of it. She has just become huge. Of course, a New York Times best-selling author. She also wrote The Winemaker's Wife, which for anyone who enjoys wine, I believe that's set out in France. She's also a lovely woman, and she's based here in Florida. So I've had the opportunity to do a couple of events with her. And she's the reason I like her books is because she really evokes a lot of emotion. Her books are tear jerkers. You feel for the characters. You want to see the characters succeed and get out of their situations. And then she rewards you with a really gratifying, satisfying ending at the end of the story. So, I wouldn't call her books dark or depressing. We see the characters in a crisis, but we can trust that Kristen Harmel is going to wrap up the story in a really satisfying way. And also, I've learned a lot about World War II and some of the lesser known stories that occurred through her writing. The other author that I aspire to be, I guess you could say, although she just writes so beautifully, I sometimes have to set her books down and take a deep breath, is Paula McLain. This is The Paris Wife. This is about Hemingway's first wife, Hadley Richardson. And a lot of this takes place in Paris, hence the title. In the 1920s, the Jazz Age. And this book, I rarely say this, but this book basically wrecked me. I just felt like I was one of the characters. It's so beautifully told. It's very immersive in 1920s Paris. And I definitely think that if I had to recommend any book from the pile I'm showing you today, this is probably in the top 2 or 3. So I absolutely love The Paris Wife.
I want to skip forward a question or two. I feel like a lot of your books that you've been recommending are very much kind of in line with your own genre, which is historical scandalous mysteries. What is the book or best book that you've read that's not in that genre?
Yes. I have this very weird, quirky thing about me, which is that I love maritime narrative nonfiction. So nonfiction that's about ships, oceans, seafaring, etc. I don't know why this is. This interest started when I still lived in Kansas and I was landlocked. So it has nothing to do with me being in Florida. This is just a very weird organic interest of mine. My favorite book ever of all time, and yes, I'm saying that, is narrative nonfiction by my favorite author, Erik Larson, and it's Dead Wake. It's the sinking of the Lithuania. That's what it's about. And this book, I think I read in like 3 or 4 sittings. And the beautiful thing about Erik Larson, and actually I've got 2 other books in this category I'm going to show you. All of these authors do a magnificent job making these true stories read like fiction. So they introduce you to the key characters in the beginning. They describe what's known about these characters from real historical records. They present an issue or a conflict that needs resolution, but everything you're reading is true. It's almost like watching a documentary that you can't hit pause on because you're just so fascinated. So Dead Wake, my favorite book of all time, whole world. 2 other books in this same genre. In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrook. This is also a really good one. This is set in 1819, about a voyage that takes off from Nantucket, and they go to, they're going whale hunting essentially. And this is the inspiration for Moby Dick, this story that's mentioned in the book. So I learned a lot about ship voyages from the 19th century in this book as well. Absolutely loved it. Of those 3, this is the most recent that I've read, Madhouse at the End of the Earth by Julian Sancton. This story, which is about these men who get locked in ice on their journey to the South Pole on their ship. What transpired among those sailors is even used today by NASA as they're studying the effects of darkness and isolation on the human psyche. So, as astronomers look to going to Mars or what have you, they, not necessarily this book, but this story and the men and kind of what happened to them here has been something that they've studied for their own use. So great story, very difficult to read at times, but completely fascinating to anyone else who likes, the ocean or ships or seafaring.
This is not at all maritime related, but have you read any of Douglas Preston's nonfiction?
I haven't. What does he write?
He writes a variety of things, and I would recommend him to you in terms of like narrative nonfiction that reads like fiction. He writes, of course, the Pendergast series, starting with Relic, but he also wrote, oh God, what's the one set in Italy? The Monster of Florence.
Okay.
And he also did, I think it's The Kingdom of the Monkey God. And they're both totally different. One of them's about an Amazonian journey that he took, and the other one is about being in Italy. And I don't want to give any spoilers because they're so interesting, but if that's your nonfiction jam, I recommend it.
Absolutely. You said his name is Douglas Preston?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, is there a book or an author that's a comfort read for you?
Yes. This is, it took me a second to remember what I pulled for that question. When I think about a comfort read, where I most often read my comfort reads is in bed when I've had a stressful day and I kind of want to slow my brain down before trying to fall asleep. So I had to grab this one from my nightstand. But this is the Book of Elizabethan Verse. I don't know. I think if someone wanted to find this, you would probably want to check like eBay or abebooks.com. It's probably also been digitized, but it's the Book of Elizabethan Verse. They also have a book of Georgian verse. There's a bunch of different ones in the series. I got this at an antiquarian book fair. I'm a big fan of old books. I have a shelf devoted to some of my most prized antique books. But this is all poetry written by people who lived during Shakespeare's era. And so there's actually quite a bit of Shakespeare in here. And I just like the verse format when I'm not trying to consume a story, but I still feel like I want words to comfort me. And this book is, it kind of goes in categories. So in other words, there's a section about the weather and seasons. There's a section about birth and new life. There's a section about death. There's a section about romance. And so kind of depending on what I'm feeling or maybe what's going on in my life at that time, I love pulling out different, poetry. I'm also reading Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, I think is how you say her name. That's a more contemporary book of poetry, but long story short, I love reading verse, and it's nice because you can just take them in little tidbits. You don't need to worry about finishing a whole story or catching up with what a character is doing. It's very much, it's almost like music in a way to me.
We're already running out of time. I can't even believe it. How about a book that you've loved that you couldn't believe wasn't better known? It's kind of a hidden gem.
That book is A Cup of Tea by Amy Ephron. And I'm curious if anybody has heard of it because it's kind of obscure, which is the point of the question. This I read in a single sitting on a plane. It's not long. It's a couple hundred pages, but they're like half-size pages. Very quick read. It takes place during World War I. Although the war, if you're not into war fiction, that's fine. It's just when it takes place. It's not like a war novel, but it's about a woman who's very wealthy. On a rainy, cold night, she meets a mysterious woman. She brings her home. That her husband and this mysterious woman begin a romance, and we kind of watch what falls out of that. But it's very entertaining. And I remember when reading this thinking, why have I never heard about this? I found this at one of those library sales where books are like 10 cents or 25 cents, and I just picked it up. And I absolutely loved it. And I went and looked for more of her work, but this seemed to be the only one of this sort of style. So this is the only book I've read of hers.
Okay, I have a couple questions that I want to leave till the end, so I want to get to some of our audience questions. Someone would like to know the best piece of writing advice that you've received that you still use in your own writing.
Yeah, so that's easy for me to answer because I just started my third book this week. And even though I've published 2 novels, I still feel like my writing isn't good. And so my piece of advice to you is turn off that inner critic and just forge through. Because revisions and edits are going to take care of a lot of that. So just get the words down. And I think a lot of people who set out to write a book, this is where they get caught. They read their first couple chapters. They say, this is horrible. This is never going to get published. And they give up and move on to the next thing. The reality is every best-selling author, their first draft absolutely sucks and is unreadable. So just, you have to have the discipline to forge through.
Can you give us some examples of books that you loved to read as a child?
Yes, I loved The Babysitter's Club, the Sweet Valley High series. In fact, because both of those have so many in the set, and this was pre-Goodreads, I had a long sheet of paper and I color-coded each of the titles, and then I had little boxes and symbols that I would draw to indicate whether I had read them, whether I was about to read them, and what I thought of them. So it truly was like my own personal predecessor to Goodreads on paper.
And I know we skipped some of our questions that we sent you in advance. So are there any books in your TBR pile that you want to be sure that we talk about before we go tonight?
So a book, it's not on my TBR because I've already read it, but anytime someone recently has asked, like, what's just a must read for you? I have said The Maid by Nita Prose. It was, I believe, a GMA pick, so it's possible some people on this call have already read it, but it's about a hotel. She has the best voice I've heard in all of fiction. Totally quirky, totally entertaining. And this maid finds a dead body as she's cleaning one of the rooms. And then we kind of delve into that mystery. So I loved that book. I highly recommend that. A couple of others that are coming out. The Villa by Rachel Hawkins, that is coming out soon. I loved that one. The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. That's coming out soon. I was asked to blurb both of those, and both were excellent. So those are a couple of books that I would recommend.
And just to guess, about how many books do you have teetering on your TBR pile right now?
Gosh, I have probably a half dozen that are waiting on me for endorsements or blurbs. So those all have deadlines to read. And then between my Kindle and like books in my living room that are stacked up waiting, probably like 25 that I'd like to read. And I know that I'm just going to keep adding probably one a week. So there's no end to it.
I think that's the whole purpose of TBR.
Yes.
So this is an audience question and a question from us. What can we look forward to in the near future? You've given us some hints about some upcoming books you have, and then one of our attendees would love for you to tell us about your second book in a sentence or two.
Yeah, so The London Seance Society is my next book. It comes out March 21st. It was originally scheduled for April 11th, but we moved it up. So March 21, it's available for pre-order now. It is about a spiritualist in high Victorian London who conjures the spirits of murder victims to ascertain the identity of the people who killed them. And she and an understudy are called on a high-profile case in London, and they soon begin to suspect that they are not out to solve a crime, but perhaps entangled in one themselves. So it was a ton of fun to write. Anybody who loves seances and ghosts is going to just absolutely love the story. So that's what's coming next from me.
And I'm sure that you are on all sorts of lockdown on this, but you hinted at a third book. Is there anything that you can say on that?
All I can say is I just started chapter 1 this week. So, a few people on social media this week, they're like, what's the topic? What's the pitch? And my lips are completely sealed. Only my agent and editor are aware of that. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be on brand for me, but also the most ambitious project I've undertaken yet. It's not set in London, I can tell you that much. Whereas my first 2 books are. So I think readers are going to love it. It's going to be somewhat unexpected.
Well, I can just feel from the audience that they're already excited about both of those.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here tonight with us, Sarah. We really appreciate you taking the time and giving us all of your favorite reads and recommendations. For those of you who joined a little late, no need to worry, because Mina has diligently been taking notes on all of these books that Sarah shared with us. So we will be sending a follow-up email out to everybody who registered, so you'll be able to take a look at everything that she's shared with us tonight. This program has also been recorded, so for anybody who wasn't able to make it, please send them to the Ashland Public Library YouTube page so that they can take a look at what we chatted about. And again, this is our final session for this series. So thank you so much to Sarah for being just the capstone to the project, and for all of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, Mina, for having me. This was wonderful.
Have a good night, everyone.
All right.